When you're trying to read a main character that you don't care about in a setting that is overwhelming with a plot that you can't find, this is a little bit of a recipe for disaster. Hello, I'm Jessie the Sleepy Koala because I am Australian and perpetually tired, and I am very tired today and have not actually been feeling well. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to record. So I'll see how this goes, and maybe I'll just scrap the whole thing, or maybe it might turn out okay. Hopefully. Today I wanted to do a roundup of all of the books that I read in August. I am a bit late for doing this because I initially wanted to get this out right at the end of August, the start of September, and that didn't happen because I had to deal with some really shitty medical professionals who put me into a depressive slump for several days, including today. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. I read a lot more books than I was expecting to read this month. And partially this is because I finished a couple of books that I actually started prior to August, and some of them I just really loved and I raced through them very, very quickly. But also I just started a couple of audiobooks and I get through them very quickly because I listen to them faster than they are read at. I listen to them at 1.7 speed. I can't quite do 2 speed for an audiobook. That's what I do for a lot of other things. But for an audiobook, I just need it to be a bit faster. And I've quite been enjoying it. I never used to be much of an audiobook listener, not because I thought there was anything wrong with it or didn't consider it reading. It 100% is. I just had trouble paying attention to them and found that if I zoned out for 30 seconds, a minute, I lost everything. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know who people were. Things that were really important I missed. And of course I do the same thing when I'm reading a physical book. It's just much easier for me to tell where to go back to because I'm generally on the same page, or I can just flip back a page. Whereas knowing with an audiobook, you kind of have to skim backwards in time and hope you eventually find something that lets you know where you are so that you can keep going. But I've started audiobooks at the start of this year, and they have drastically increased how many books that I read as long as I actually listen to them, and I have stopped listening to them on and off at different points. However, I got through quite a few this month and had some that I really enjoyed. Anyway, into the roundup. First up, I'm actually gonna go with both of these at the same time. I read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom this month and really, really enjoyed them. I've put out a review for Six of Crows. I'm going to do one for Crooked Kingdom as well. I just had to reread the book before I was able to do it. I actually finished that yesterday, so technically not in the month of August, but it's close enough, and they are a pair, so I figured I would put them together, and hopefully the review of Crooked Kingdom is out soon, because I have thoughts and opinions on this book. But for Six of Crows, I adored this book. Go check out my review of it if you want to know the in-depth details. There is a non-spoiler part and a spoiler part, but I thought the character work in this book was absolutely incredible. I thought the plot was pretty great for the last third. The first 2/3 of the book, it's a lot more character development, and if I'd known that going in, I think that would have helped a lot. But I think on a reread, I will adore that because then I will love all of the characters. In this book, you have 6 characters that you follow doing a heist to try and kidnap someone from a very well-guarded foreign land. And it is full of wacky hijinks. I think the planning in this of how they pull off the heist was absolutely incredible. I was blown away. I loved all of it. There was some just absolutely crazy twists where I just wasn't expecting it. But I got there and I was like, of course they did that. Of course they did this insane thing and I was not expecting it. Great. That's exactly what I expected from this book. So it was really, really good. It's part of the duology with Crooked Kingdom, and this book follows directly on from Six of Crows. So I, of course, wanted to read them one after the other. And I did. Not to go into too much now, because I do want to do an in-depth review of this book, but I loved it, and I thought it had a lot more flaws than Six of Crows did. I think it had incredible character work, incredible relationship development. Bardugo is very good on the character side, and she did not disappoint with this book. Almost said movie, meant book. But there's some issues I take with the plot and the way it's set up, and I do think it is less tight than the plot of Six of Crows was, and would still recommend the book. The plot is lots of fun. It's a whirlwind. There's so much, hence why I had to reread it before I could even do a review, because there's so much in this book. But there are more issues I find with it. But it has incredible character work, does follow over from Six of Crows, and trust me, you'll get to the end, and you will want to read this book, probably immediately, without going into anything. Still really enjoyed this book. Wasn't as good as the first one. There's some very good points in it, but I do think there are a lot more criticisms that you can find in this book out of the duology. I have just realized that literally every single other book that I finished this month was an audiobook, so I will put them up there on the screen so you can see a picture of the cover. But the next book that I read, or it was more I technically finished, was Twilight by Stephanie Myers. And I have been rereading this since April of this year. I do think I want to read the other books in the series, but we'll see how it goes. I actually really enjoyed it. The premise is that you have your main character, Bella Swan. She moves to this tiny little town in Washington State, and it's because her dad lives there. So she moves in with her dad to finish high school and kind of go on from there with her life. While she is there, she meets this gorgeous other boy. Well, I guess he is not the other boy, he's the boy. She meets this boy, Edward Cullen, and she is fascinated with him, and he seems to not like her, and she doesn't understand why. And they kind of revolve around each other and circle around each other for a while until things collide, and she finds out he's a vampire, and he's also super into her, and she's super into him, and they now have to try and figure out how to have this relationship, even though he wants to drink her blood. And that is a great point of tension for them. Some other things happen in the book that I actually was really annoyed about. Rereading this, I read it back in high school, back when the Twilight craze was happening, and I loved the book. And then I hated the book because, that's what was cool at the time. Whereas now I know that hating things because it's cool is not actually very cool. But I was a dumb teenager, and I'd like to think I am a slightly less dumb adult. But rereading it now, I actually really thought the romance was the best part of this book. I know that there's a lot of criticism around the romance because of Edward being quite controlling. Very fair. He very much is. Definitely criticize that. And also Bella being a relatively big stereotype of a character, which, I don't know, rereading it, I can't say I cared all that much. This book was not meant to be an in-depth character study. It was meant to be a fun vampire romance. And it did deliver on that. And that was the best part in my mind. And then they had to go and ruin the entire book for the last third by remembering that plot exists for some reason, and you can't have a book without some sort of dramatic plot, even though there was already a central conflict in this book of Edward wanting to drink Bella's blood and them trying to figure out how a relationship would work with that. that, to me, in a vampire romance, is a very good conflict to deal with. However, no, we had to add some plot in to the end of the book, and I thought it was dumb, which is very funny because when I was in high school, I really liked one of the characters that turned up in this. But now I don't care, and it was just such a big change from the rest of the book that I wish it hadn't happened. I wish the entire ending had been different and had actually just followed the same path that the book was taking with the romance that was going on between our two main characters. But instead we had to introduce something else so that we could kind of hurry along what was happening. It would have taken too long, I imagine, if it just gone the natural route that it was going and continued following that storyline and just having a relationship study as the book. Like, not a character study, but a relationship study and a romance where you focus on the romance. I was enjoying it, even though it was taking me months to get through. And then I got to that last third, and I hated it. I complained to my husband so much about the end of this book because it just drove me up the wall. So I gave it a 3-star in the end, and I think that it really didn't need the last third. And if it didn't have the last third, I actually don't know if I would have given it any more than that, but I think the book is fine for what it is and probably doesn't deserve the hate that it gets. And I do think I will read the rest of the series eventually. Very slowly. And I did, I did buy the reverse of the first book. It's called Life and Death. It's apparently Twilight Reimagined 10th Anniversary Edition. And it's if Bella was the vampire and Edward was the human, and I think it's literally just the story in reverse. And I am really interested to know what that is like. I don't know when I will read it. It might be a little while, but I'll get there eventually. I don't expect it to be any better than Twilight. I don't know if I expect it to be any worse than Twilight either, but it just seems like a interesting change to the story, and I enjoy the thought of that. But Twilight's okay. If you want vampire romance, go for it. Maybe you'll get as annoyed with the forced plot as I did, or maybe you will have the opposite thing where you're kind of bored with the romance stuff and then the plot kicks in and it's a breath of fresh air. I know there are people out there who have said that. I read reviews like that. Or maybe you're just like both. That was the reason the book series became so big. I think for the rest of these, I will actually go in star order because by God, the last one is going to take me forever because it's certainly something. The next book I read was Circe by Madeline Miller, and this is not my type of book, I found. I did not actually finish this. I got maybe halfway through and then I DNF'd the book, and that was with me really pushing myself to see if I could get to a point where I would actually enjoy it, but I didn't. I found that even though I know bits and pieces of Greek mythology, it felt like I needed a university degree to follow everything that was crammed into this book. And maybe people are really into that, but when you give me 20 characters in the first 2 chapters that are all different gods and goddesses, that's a bit overwhelming. And that's what it felt like. The world building to me was way too much. Like, if you're going to do a story set with Greek mythology, then at least what I would personally prefer to read is something that is of a smaller scope. Like, pick a few of the Greek gods, pick a few related characters, but don't throw the whole pantheon at me, cause I don't want to know that much. That's too much for me in one go. And this was all in the first third of the book. It was just constant new characters, new things happening. And that was the other thing, is all of these things kept happening or being talked about, but I had no idea what was actually relevant and what was just random side things. I did get far enough to find out that some of those things that didn't seem relevant at all kind of were later on, mostly as a background type thing, but it made it hard to follow the plot because I didn't know what the plot was, and it just felt like I was moving through this vast story with no direction and thinking that maybe I will get somewhere at some point. I knew from the synopsis that Circe ends up banished to an island, so I kept telling myself, just wait, just get through until she gets to the island and maybe it will calm down. And it did. It did calm down. For all of 20 minutes of the audiobook. And then it was immediately back into other things. I felt like I was being pulled along in a way that was not overly pleasant for me. And the other thing that really bothered me with this book is, even though we're in Circe's head, we're from her POV, but it felt like she was telling a story of someone else. It really felt hands off, from a distance, watching someone else's story happen, even though it was her own. So I never felt like I connected with her or even really cared about what she was going through, because she didn't really seem to internalize anything and just kind of kept going along with things, even when those things were bad things that were happening and things that she wasn't enjoying. I just didn't feel it at all. So I guess that probably didn't help. When you're trying to read a main character that you don't care about in a setting that is overwhelming with a plot that you can't find, that this is a little bit of a recipe for disaster. That is just me. Other people love this book. I've seen how much other people love this book. I just don't think it's the book for me. But I know that there's actually nothing wrong with the book. Even though I didn't finish it, I rate it 4 stars. It seems like a very good book, just not a good book for me. And maybe I will try it again in the future. I'm not quite sure yet. I did listen to this on audiobook, so maybe it would be easier if I was reading it physically instead. I'm not quite sure. But I do think if I did reread it, it would probably be easier for me to get through, because at least then I would know kind of the first half of what's happening. I know what I'm going into. I do now know where the plot is and how to follow it and who is actually relevant to this story. But it's very hard on a first time read, at least for me. I really, really struggled with this. Will say Hermes was great. I adored Hermes when he turned up, and just the way he interacted. It was great. I loved Hermes. Hermes was a very good character. A+ character. I actually have to cut this video in half just because of how much ranting I have to do on the bottom book of what I read this month. I will close out part 1, and in part 2 we will talk about mental illness and its portrayal in media, with the 2 books I want to talk about being Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily R. Austin and Tell Me Lies by J.P. Pomare. Come listen to me rant in my next video. Like, comment, subscribe. I will see you next time.